In our lecture on the hermeneutics circle, I explained that hermeneutics is the study of interpretation. And that is true. But the term hermeneutics, or hermeneuticists, is also used for thinkers in the humanities who believe that interpretation is especially important. That understanding the meaning of individual books and paintings and actions and so on is the primary task of the humanities. Collingwood, whom we met in our lectures on history, is a hermeneuticist in this sense. He believes that the task of the historian is to reenact the thoughts of the historical actors. And of course, we can only do that if we know what their actions and their works meant to them. In this lecture, we will focus on another hermeneuticist, perhaps the most influential of them all, the German philosopher Wilhelm Dilthey. Dilthey was interested in the method and the aim of the humanities, which he believed to be very different from those of the natural sciences. Now, in order to understand that aim and method, we first have to determine what the humanities study, what their subject matter is. According to Dilthey, what they study is, in German, Erlebnis, which we can translate as something like experience, or maybe conscious experience. In effect, what the humanities study is what human beings think and feel and want and so on. They study what it is like to be a certain person, to live in a certain time or society, to write a certain book, make a certain painting, and so on. But if that is true, it may seem that we have a big methodological problem. For other people's experiences are not available to us. You cannot observe my experiences. And you certainly cannot observe the experiences of Napoleon or a medieval monk. So what exactly is it that the humanities study? Well, Dilthey says they study expressions of experiences. Because people experience the world in a certain way, they write certain books, build certain buildings, observe certain customs, and so on. We cannot directly study anyone's experience, but we can and do study everything which expresses their experience. For Dilthey then, there is a distinction between the things we study and the things we really want to know about. We study expressions because only expressions are available for study. But our aim is not so much to learn about these expressions themselves. Our aim is to go a step back and understand the experience that led to these expressions. For understanding, Dilthey uses the German word verstehen, which has become common even in the English literature. Verstehen is a special kind of understanding. It means that we can put ourselves in the place of the person who made the expression and really experience what that person experienced while making that expression. If we read a poem and get it in the same state of mind that the original poet had, that is verstehen. And the same is true about any expression that we study. Of course, this is very close to what Collingwood later called reenactment. The only real difference is that Collingwood thought we should only reenact thoughts, not feelings and wishes and so on. While Dilthey thinks you should be able to experience every aspect of the original experiences of the person you're studying. But that's a minor difference. Dilthey would have had a lot of sympathy for Collingwood's theory of history. Now, Dilthey goes on to point out that verstehen is something you can only do in the humanities. A natural scientist cannot try to experience what the volcano experienced when it was erupting, or what the fish experienced when it was eating another fish. Natural scientists, Dilthey tells us, are not looking for verstehen. They are looking for knowledge about laws and other regular patterns in the world. Now that is a distinction we have seen before. But from this distinction, Dilthey draws an important conclusion. In order to be a good natural scientist, he says, you only need to be smart. You must be able to recognize complicated patterns, but that's it. In order to be a good scholar in the humanities, on the other hand, being smart is necessary, but it's not enough. Because just being smart doesn't mean you can succeed at experiencing what other people have experienced. For that, you need sensitivity, wisdom, what we today might call emotional intelligence. And in general, what you need is a lot of life experience of your own. Only someone with life experience can succeed in the humanities. To say it in a less friendly way, natural science could be done by robots or computers, but only fully developed human beings can be historians and literary critics and so on. This idea of a fully developed human being is important for Dilthey not only when he speaks about how you should do work in the humanities, but also when he talks about why you should do it. For Dilthey, the humanities don't just require fully rounded human beings, they also produce such people. He points out that in our normal lives we have very limited experiences. For one thing, I can only experience the world as a white Dutch male living in the early 21st century. And even within those limits, a lot of experiences are unavailable to me. So my own experience of the world is necessarily extremely limited. That is where, according to Dilthey, verstehen comes in. Verstehen, he says, opens for the scholar a wide realm of possibilities which do not exist within the limitations of his real life. Dilthey then illustrates this with the example of studying Martin Luther, the Protestant reformer who lived in the 15th and 16th centuries. Dilthey writes the following: the possibility of experiencing religious states in one's own life is as narrowly limited for me as for most of my contemporaries. But when I read through the letters and writings of Luther, the reports of his contemporaries, the records of religious disputes and councils, and those of his dealings with officials, I experience a religious process in which life and death are at issue, of such eruptive power and energy as is beyond the possibility of direct experience for a man of our time. But I can relive it. So, by studying the historical material, we can recreate the experience that Luther had, an experience that we would never have in our real life. Dilthey then goes on to draw the following conclusion. Thus, the inner-directed man can experience many other existences in his imagination. Limited by circumstances, he can yet glimpse alien beauty in the world and areas of life beyond his reach. Put generally, man, tied and limited by the reality of life, is liberated not only by art, as has often been explained, but also by historical understanding. So art and history, and one could add the study of other cultures to that list, allow us to experience things that we could normally not experience. And Dilthey believes that that is liberating. What does it liberate us from? Well, it liberates us from the limitations of our daily lives, which only allow us to develop certain parts of our personality, but not others. So what the humanities can do, according to Dilthey, is nothing less than setting us free, allowing us to escape at least in part, from the world that we are forced to live in, and thus allowing us to become more fully developed, more well-rounded human beings than we would otherwise be. Now, frankly, that sounds pretty great. At least, it does to me. And Dilthey's philosophy has certainly had a lot of influence on the humanities. But one may also wonder whether all research in the humanities really aspires to these lofty goals. When we read a historical work on Luther, would the author really try to get us to re-experience what Luther experienced? When we read an article on the painter Mondrian, will the author really try to put us into the mindset of Mondrian? Probably not. Most academic work in the humanities focus on much more specific questions that may have little to do with recreating an original experience. And we may wonder whether such recreation is even possible. Can we really think like Luther, who lived in such a different time? Isn't the distance between us and him much too large for that? Whatever the answer to such questions may be, Dilthey's view of the humanities certainly gives food for thought, and it captures an important reason for studying the human sciences in the first place.